the alleged $4 million loan. It's May 10th, 2026. Welcome to Yes to Hell With, YesToHellWith.com. Today we begin examining the quote-unquote centerpiece of the government's case against Orlando Carter, the alleged $4 million loan obligation. Did it exist? Now understand this carefully. This is not a side issue. This was not a minor detail buried somewhere inside the prosecution's theory. And according to the government's theory of prosecution, this alleged obligation of $4 million formed the structural foundation of the fraud narrative itself. Without the obligation, large portions of the prosecution's theory weaken dramatically. And this is where the public must begin slowing down and asking difficult questions. Because according to Carter's own records, serious contradictions emerged then and years later concerning whether the obligation was real or not. Now, before we proceed further, let us establish something important. Most Americans hear the phrase federal financial prosecution and immediately assume that surely the FBI verified the debt. Surely prosecutors authenticated the records. Oh, surely the bank's narrative was independently tested. And surely the obligation legally existed. And ultimately, it is presumed that the underlying structure was examined before criminal prosecution began. But according to the records that Carter has, that assumption is the entire problem. Because then and years later, major contradictions began emerging. The OCC, which is under the Department of the Treasury, reflected only a $250,000 loan obligation, which PNC Bank confirmed. PNC Bank admitted as much, that there was no $4 million loan. This was in a judicial filing that it, quote, does not and never has asserted that it made a $4 million loan to Carter or his company, end quote. Now pause and think about this carefully and what this means, because according to the prosecution's theory, this alleged obligation formed the centerpiece, as the court called it, of the entire fraud case. Yet years later, according to Carter's records, the OCC, as I said, reflects only a $250,000 debt, which was years earlier than the PNC infraction, so to speak. Authenticated records remain, therefore, unresolved. This becomes extremely important because under ordinary assumptions, most people believe the government independently verifies the financial structure before building a federal prosecution around it, especially when the American could be innocent. But according to Carter's files, that independent structural verification never occurred, and it never occurred properly. Now, understand something carefully, please. This series is not arguing that every banking inconsistency proves innocence. The issue is much more structural. The issue is whether investigators, prosecutors, and later federal officials independently verified the existence and structure of the obligation before transforming it into criminal reality. Now, this is where the Liberty Dialogues framework becomes important, because under the LD analysis, the proper sequence is authority, jurisdiction, status, standing, obligation, and enforcement. Under that framework, obligation must be independently established before enforcement legitimately proceeds. But in Carter's tragic example, that sequence was reversed. The prosecution proceeded first without confirmation of PNC's accusation, and now think about the implications of this. If the obligation itself was never independently authenticated in the manner the public assumes and expects, then the prosecution's narrative may have hardened into reality before the foundation beneath it was fully verified. And that brings us directly into the next stage of the story, the FBI investigation. Because investigators are supposed to independently test allegations before they advance the recommendation that criminal conduct has been confirmed, and then prosecutors transform that into criminal charges. But as we know from Carter's records, which you will soon understand, that investigative verification never occurred in this case. In the next episode, the FBI investigation. And as always, may truth reign supreme.